At the bustling train station in Nairobi, Jane Bennett wrestled with her suitcase, the weight of it symbolic of the emotional baggage she'd carried since discovering her husband's betrayal. Her trip to Africa was meant to be a healing escape, but frustration quickly clouded her intentions. Surrounded by noise and movement, she felt lost until a kind voice cut through the chaos. "Allow me to assist you," came the words, gentle and sincere. Jane turned to see a tall, older African man with a warm smile. His presence was calm, his demeanor respectful. With little effort, he lifted her suitcase, his movement steady and confident. "Looks like it's been a long day," he said, his English polished and accent smooth. Jane let out a breath, the tension easing from her shoulders. "You could say that." As they walked toward the platform, the man introduced himself as Charles, a local teacher who worked with children. He shared stories of the city's vibrant culture, rich history, and the resilience of its people. Jane listened, captivated by his passion and his ability to bring the world around them to life with words. When he asked what brought her to Kenya, Jane hesitated. "I guess I'm searching for something, or trying to run from something," she admitted. Charles didn't press. Instead, he offered practical advice, places to visit, areas to avoid, and tips for navigating local customs. Jane was surprised by his effortless kindness. When she questioned why he'd helped her, he responded simply, "Kindness costs nothing, but it can mean everything." The train rocked gently as it pulled away, and the pair found seats across from each other. Jane hadn't intended to open up, but something about Charles made her feel safe. She spoke of the betrayal that had led her here, her choice to step away from a life that had become unrecognizable, and her hope to rediscover herself. Charles listened without interruption, his dark eyes filled with empathy. Then, in quiet moments, he shared his own losses, the dreams he'd deferred, the people he'd loved and lost, and how he had chosen hope in the face of it all. Jane was struck by his honesty and resilience. With each mile the train carried them, a shift occurred within her. The emotional fog she'd carried began to lift, replaced by a tentative sense of peace. When they reached their destination, Charles helped with her bags once more. As they parted, he smiled and said, "Sometimes journeys surprise us in ways we never expect. I hope this one does that for you." In the days that followed, Jane and Charles spent more time together. What began as companionship grew into something neither of them could easily define. They shared quiet walks and deep conversations. Even their silences felt comforting. Jane found herself anticipating their next meeting, savoring the familiarity that blossomed between them. Charles admired her grace and quiet strength. At 65, Jane had endured heartbreak and found her way through it. Yet behind her composed exterior, Charles sensed a tender vulnerability. Jane, too, noticed something shifting. She hadn't planned on opening her heart again. But Charles's gentle nature and unwavering presence stirred something within her. Still, she questioned it. Was it loneliness she felt, or something more profound? One evening, as they watched the sun dip behind the lake, Jane pondered the unspoken bond between them. Charles, too, sat quietly, his gaze lingering on her face, as if he were trying to memorize the moment. They didn't speak of love, not yet, but it was there, lingering in shared glances and unspoken comfort. Each day, their connection deepened. Everything changed when Lucia appeared. Charles bumped into the woman at a local market. Jane was there too. The exchange between Charles and Lucia was brief, but filled with familiarity. Too familiar. Jane felt a pang in her chest. Jealousy wasn't something she expected to feel, but there it was. Over the next few days, Jane couldn't shake the discomfort. Lucia seemed to appear often, always warmly interacting with Charles. Jane told herself she was being irrational, but the tightness in her chest wouldn't ease. At a cafe one afternoon, Jane watched Charles and Lucia laugh like old friends. Something about their connection made Jane feel like an outsider, intruding on a space that wasn't hers. Later that night, Jane confronted Charles. "What's going on between you and her?" Charles looked stunned. "Lucia is an old friend, nothing more." But Jane wasn't convinced. Her voice trembled. "I don't want to be part of some unfinished story. I've been hurt before. I can't do it again." Charles reached for her hand, but she pulled away. The fear of being betrayed again was too real, too raw. The next morning, Jane made a decision. She packed her things silently, knowing she had to leave. Charles pleaded with her to stay, but Jane shook her head. "I need space. I need to find clarity." He watched helplessly as she walked away. Days turned into weeks. Jane continued her travels, but the joy had gone. She had set out to find peace, and for a while she thought she had. But now, all she felt was the ache of something lost. Back in Nairobi, Charles was filled with regret. He had never meant to hurt Jane. In his hesitation, in his failure to be completely honest, he had created a distance he now didn't know how to bridge. He thought long and hard about what to do. Eventually, he wrote her a letter. In it, he poured out his heart, his regret, his fear, his truth. He explained his history with Lucia, his confusion, and most importantly, his growing feelings for Jane. He hadn't realized how much he cared until she was gone. Jane received the letter on a quiet afternoon. As she read Charles's words, her hands trembled. The vulnerability in his voice, even through ink and paper, touched something deep within her. She remembered the man who had lifted her suitcase with a smile, the man who had listened to her, made her laugh, and reminded her of what it meant to trust. She had a choice to make. The next morning, Jane returned to the art gallery where they had once wandered for hours, speaking of life and love and everything in between. And there he was, waiting. They said nothing at first, just a look, long and unspoken. Then Charles stepped closer. "I never stopped thinking about you." Jane's voice was quiet. "I wasn't sure I could trust again, but I think I want to try." They stood there, two people carrying old wounds and new hopes. It wouldn't be easy, but they both knew it was worth the effort. As they walked side by side, no longer strangers, Jane realized that the journey she had feared would be lonely had led her somewhere unexpected, not just to healing, but perhaps to love. The road ahead was uncertain, but together it no longer felt so daunting.